people. He is by background a quantum optician, and I would dare to say by avocation, that's his interest too. But of course he has been an academic leader and a research leader in many different capacities, as most recently as president of the Helmholtz Society, and before that as president of Humboldt University in Berlin. So we're very grateful, Jürgen, for your coming and sharing this, your expertise with us on this particular topic, and we're very keen to hear how you think we'll be able to take part. Welcome.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Dear Ian, thank you very much for this nice introduction. And before I start, let me thank Mlynek King and you, Ian, for having organized this meeting today. As a matter of fact, it's an interesting day today, not only for you, also for me. I had the pleasure to meet the German ambassador this morning, who already had prepared something for the German government early this morning. He said he was early up at 4 a.m. this morning to really get the latest news. And well, let's cross fingers that things go well in the interest of the UK and also Europe. I must also say that I think all people in Europe somehow, how can I say, were with the people here in London after what happened to you over the last couple of months. I can only tell you we had the same situation in Berlin last December, and that's terrible. But, I mean, life has to go on, and I think we can't give in. And I think that's the attitude here in the UK, and I think everybody also admires you for this attitude. So I just wanted to say this few words at the beginning of my presentation. So let's talk a little bit about quantum technology. I think this is, as you say here, carry codes to Newcastle. But when it turned out that I would be here over the weekend to see La Traviata in Glyndebourne tomorrow, and when I discussed this with Ian, he said maybe it's a good idea to have a discussion with the UK scientific community, the quantum technology community on the Flagship. And I'm very grateful about this opportunity, because I do this all over Europe to tell people about this initiative, and especially to hear from the scientific community what you are thinking about the Flagship and what your expectations are. How do you feel about the process so far, and of course, especially here in the UK, what your expectations are in view of this difficult issue of the Brexit, which probably will come sooner or later. I can only add to what I said in another context just a few minutes ago, at least from the German side, that we really feel sad about the outcome of this referendum, but this is something that we now have to live with it. And we as scientists, as always, have to try to make the best out of it. Science always lives from cooperations, and I think this should be also some kind of guiding principle for the future. Okay. So I will briefly go through a few transparencies, and then there will be time for question and answers. And I think one of the ideas of the meeting today is to really let you ask questions, what this is all about, the Flagship, what it means, how the initial phase will work, and so forth. And at least I can try together with Peter and Ian to answer these questions. Now, with respect to, where is the pointer or to? Okay, good. With respect to quantum technology, you already have one of the largest initiatives. Thank you. You already have one of the largest initiatives in Europe in this area, and I think one or a few of the colleagues who really pushed this initiative are also here in the audience. Let me start with citation of Bill Phillips. Quantum information is a radical departure in information technology, more fundamentally different from current technology than a digital computer is from the abacus. Now, if we talk about quantum technology, of course, that's also not new. And again, let me just briefly go through this transparency, because this is probably also well known to you. Quantum theory is known for more than a century, and many of also technologies like the semiconductor technology, the laser and so forth, relies on quantum phenomena. But what is called the second quantum revolution probably can be best characterized by the fact that now use is made of individual quantum states and the manipulation of single entities like ions, atoms, and so forth, and use is made of quantum properties like superposition states and entanglement. That's probably the new aspect, something that is also well known for many years, but which now really becomes important in terms of technological possibilities. Europe's position in the world is very good in quantum technology. Roughly half of the world's publication in the field comes from EU-based groups. There is a European roadmap in place, but we are not alone. There is competition all over the world. I was traveling around the world last December to get a first-hand impression of what is going on at places like IBM, Yorktown Heights. They are working on quantum computing devices using low-temperature systems. I was in Waterloo, near Toronto, in Canada, where they have this quantum valley, significantly financed by Mike Lazaridis, one of the founders of BlackBerry. It's a significant initiative too. I visited Q Station and Google at Santa Barbara, noticing that these companies are investing hundreds of millions of dollars in the field of more quantum computing, quantum simulation, and quantum communication. I saw activities at NTT in Japan and at the University of Tokyo, and then finally the activities of Jianwei Pan in Shanghai and Hefei, which are more on quantum communication, but I must say I was really impressed by the Chinese effort, which is also underpinned with significant amounts of funding in the next couple of years. The Chinese will put more money and more effort into this quantum technology than the whole European effort, not only the flagship, but also the national initiative. So there is a lot of activity going on in the world. There is some urgent need to also position Europe. And this is one of the background of this quantum manifesto, which was published in 2016, supported by more than 3,000 scientists, research institutions, and companies. And the main idea was to help select quantum technology as the new European flagship project. As you may know, there are already 2 flagships. One is on the human brain project, simulating the human brain. It's not so much the neuroscience aspect. It's really more simulating the human brain by hardware approaches. And the other one is on graphene. I think the UK is heavily involved in both initiatives. And there will be a third one now on quantum technology. The idea is to invest roughly 1 billion euros over 10 years, 500 million euros from the European Union and the other 500 million via national programs to really position Europe in a domain that is important for its future, also with respect to wealth creation. That's a very important aspect, at least in view of this flagship. Of course, you can always ask the question, does it make sense to have such a big research initiative at all? Wouldn't it be better to somehow take the 1 billion and give it to the European Research Council and then, have an open call, everybody can apply, and those who are excellent get additional support to do their research? I think you can do this one thing, but there is also a certain interest, at least from my viewpoint, to have some kind of initiative in the flagship direction, because there is an added value, not so much through additional funding from my viewpoint. Of course, for some it's important too to have additional money, but there is a significant added value through cooperation. When I was talking to my colleagues from the Human Brain Project, and maybe some of you know that the Human Brain Project had some difficulties at the beginning. I think now it's running okay. Then they say, despite all the difficulties, the main advantage of this flagship initiative is to have people joining together all their expertise, their know-how, from the theoretical side, from the experimental side, from the infrastructure side, to really advance a research field. So that's a little bit the idea also behind this flagship initiative, and that's already outlined in this Quantum Manifesto. The time frame is shown here again. As I said, the flagship will run for 10 years. The ramp-up phase will last 3 years. First, financing of the project should start January 2019. And then there is the 3-year ramp-up phase. There is already a certain budget foreseen for the first 3 years. It's of the order of 130 million euros for the flagship. And then the 7-year of the full phase will start 2021, 22, and then for another 7 years. The goals are, as I already pointed out, not only to advance scientific leadership and excellence in this area, but also to really push technologies and to contribute to new jobs and growth from the economic viewpoint. That's, I think, something that is not so unusual for you here in the UK, because quite some of the very successful research initiatives that you had in the past in various domains here in the UK had the aim not only to support excellence, but also to make a contribution to, the standard of living and, economic growth and so forth. But that's not everywhere accepted in the same way all over Europe, where this question is always heavily debated between quality and excellence on one side and relevance and impact also in view of economic possibilities on the other side. But I think in view of this flagship, that's a discussion that we really have to lead within Europe, because otherwise we wouldn't fulfill the intention behind at least this flagship initiative. That's also why from the very beginning companies are involved in the formulation of the Quantum Manifesto and also in, let's say, the setting up of the initiative, as you will see in a moment. Okay, that's the high-level steering committee that I'm heading to help the European Commission to start this flagship. There are 24 people involved, 12 from the academic sector, and I'm sure many of you know at least some of the colleagues from the academic field. I'm very glad that Ian is part of it, because all this experience that you had so far with your Quantum Technology Hub initiative here in the UK is very valuable, and especially Ian's input with respect to lessons learned have been very helpful to set our report up. And there are representatives from companies, another 12, and as you may realize, some are big companies, like if I take the German companies Siemens and Bosch, for example, and others are small companies, ID Quantique, for example, which is, I think, a spin-off from Gisin's activity on quantum cryptography and quantum communication in Geneva. Again, the attitude of the companies was quite and is quite different. A company, let me take again a German example, a company like Siemens, does it really make sense if we get involved in this initiative? Because we are not a technology maker, we consider ourselves more as a technology taker. So if there is something useful coming out of the initiative and we can use it as part of our systems, fine. But at the moment, we will not really invest larger amounts of resources, money, and so forth into this technology. I think they are now somehow thinking this attitude over, but there is a wide spread and a wide diversity in the interest also from the private sector. Maybe we can discuss this later on with respect to the various research fields, because I think the interest of companies with respect to time horizons and really making business is quite different in the various areas. So our task was to set up a strategic research agenda, taking into account industrial aspects, to make suggestions how to implement the model, and also come up with a governance structure, including the internal governance of the flagship. Because at the end, I mean, such a 1 billion euro initiative also needs to be steered in a sensible way, not with too many committees and so forth, but in a way that there is some kind of, clear added value with respect to the many projects within the flagship. The outcome of the Strategic Research Agenda 2 is not very surprising, although it took a while to come up with this transparency. The consensus at the end was to have 4 large pillars for activities, for projects where the academic side and companies should work together in consortia of different sizes, communication, computation, simulation, sensing, and metrology. There is a horizontal bar called basic science. This basic science part really should allow to also submit proposals that address more fundamental aspects of the overall field and that cannot be really localized within one of the communication, computation, simulation, sensing, and metrology pillars. Nevertheless, the intention should be that even within the vertical pillars, you can submit proposals that address, let's say, more fundamental aspects, as long as they have some kind of relationship to either one of these 4 topical areas. So basic science is something where you can really come up with something completely new in the sense of trying to make a difference that you can't make if you are part of one of the vertical research areas. Of course, in addition, you have something like engineering and control, software and theory, and also education and training. We discussed, for example, whether quantum technology theory, quantum algorithms, and things like that should be a separate, topic. But at the end, there was a strong agreement that this should be part, really, for example, quantum algorithms of quantum computation or quantum simulation, and not be something separate. So that's why this is oriented in this matrix type structure. The same, of course, is true for education and training. So again, I think we put these transparencies on the internet later on. This somehow summarizes the main research directions of the various domains. Now, of course, the question is, if you have consortia that from the very beginning should be also cooperations of universities, let's say, the academic side, and companies, does this make sense at all? And our feeling was that probably in the sensing and metrology area, this will work best with respect to a shorter time horizon, because the sensing and metrology activities already have given rise to products and will give rise to even more advanced products. Let me again give an example of a company like Bosch. As you may know, they have these micromechanical sensors to detect accelerations and so forth. I mean, many of them are in the mobiles that we carry with us. They are saying if maybe in 5 to 10 years we have a market of 100 million euros with these type of quantum sensors and quantum metrology devices that we are talking about with respect to the second quantum revolution, that's interesting enough for us as Bosch to get involved into this initiative from the very beginning. And probably there are other companies with similar arguments where it becomes clear that sensing and metrology is something where we will see also products in the market in the next couple of years. Simulation, communication, computation is probably further ahead on the road. But the flagship only makes sense if we really commit ourselves, those who submit also proposals, to somehow, how can I say, come up with some kind of, device or demonstrator that you can show around and where it becomes obvious that this is not only basic science, but that this is really related to some kind of technology that at the end might also have a market. Okay. Now, what about the implementation? I don't want to go into all those details. What we said is we should have a two-step process. We should have a first, let's say, round where you submit some kind of short document. I think this was done in the Quantera Scheme 2 quite recently, and where then, based on a first selection, full proposals can be submitted that should have a success rate of the order of, let's say, 30%. Otherwise, our feeling was it would be just a waste of energy and time. There must be a realistic chance, if you really make it to the second step, that there is a good chance to also get funded at the end. And I would say a success rate of the order of roughly 30% plus minus is not unreasonable. Whether this will be accepted by the Commission, that's another question. But we in the steering committee thought that this would be a suggestion that we really should make, and this was made unanimously. What about the governance? Again, the governance model should be simple, but not too simple, in the sense of taking into account the various stakeholders and the various interests that people have. There is the academic side on one hand, there is the company side on the other side. Then you have this, how can I say, issue of excellence on one side that you don't want to compromise, but you also have this cohesion aspect on the other side. You have to come up with some kind of scheme that also groups, let's say, from countries where you don't have such a big critical mass, but excellent groups, where these groups in those countries can be part of it. But it was clear that quality and excellence should be really the main guiding principles, together with relevance and impact for the proposals. So the idea is at the end, that's what we will propose to the Commission, to have some kind of supervisory board. It's a steering board because, well, you need some kind of board that takes strategic decisions and that looks onto the flagship also from this more strategic point of view. Then you need some kind of coordinating body for the flagship as a whole. There is no core project like in the human brain flagship. The core project is simulating the human brain. Here in this quantum technology flagship, you have different topics that have some kind of, umbrella, which is now called quantum technology. But all these projects should somehow be kept together, also with respect to possible synergy effects, use of common infrastructure, and so forth. That's the idea of the Science and Engineering Board, which is composed by representatives of the projects within the flagship. Then you need some kind of flagship coordination office. That's part of these coordination and support action. That's the administrative part of the flagship. And then, of course, you need some feedback with the projects within the flagship, but also the quantum technology community as a whole. As an optional committee, we somehow put here scientific advisory board. That's something to be discussed. It depends strongly on the composition of the steering board. If there are too many conflicts of interest, meaning that maybe in the steering board you also have members of the scientific community that directly profit from the flagship project, then maybe you need some kind of additional independent scientific advice from the outside. But again, this is something that one has to discuss in more detail depending on how the steering board is composed. I think it's very important, and probably that's something where you are better off here in the UK than many other countries in Europe. There is this innovation mindset, meaning that we really have to somehow advertise, especially among the next generation, that the quantum technology flagship can also be an incentive to think about entrepreneurial activities, to maybe start up a company with technologies, with ideas that are developed within the flagship initiative. That's more, how can I say, a cultural, it's more a mental, it's more a mind issue, but this is something that we definitely should address too in the flagship. These are some of the companies being involved. And again, I'm showing this transparency for two reasons. One reason is the question, which companies should be part of the flagship? Is IBM, for example, considered a European company? Is Huawei considered a European company? Is Toshiba considered a European company? How should we deal, and how should the Commission deal with these questions? That's not really answered yet. Probably it will be handled in a more restrictive way. That's something that we as people from the academic side are not so used to, because we are much more open to scientific collaborations at the international and global level. But for companies, that's an issue, as is the issue of intellectual property rights. There are certain rules within the EC that have to be followed. But again, one has to come up with some kind of clear, regulations how to deal with IPR in the context of the flagship. And of course, it would be interesting also for me to hear about your experience in your quantum technology initiative here in the UK, how you deal with these issues and what kind of experiences you have made and what kind of lessons learned you really can bring into the flagship initiative from that perspective. So we need more time and more qubits, and that's it for the moment from my side. So let me thank you again for being here and maybe also listening to what I said from outside this room. I think it's a good opportunity to discuss all the questions that I somehow tried to address. I'm sure there are other questions from your side. Thank you again for your attention.
Thank you very much for that very complete and clear summary of where the flagship is and where the intention is. As you noted, there's now time for some questions, so let me invite Peter Knight, yourself here. I will join you, and perhaps Jürgen will MC for us. MC Kim, yeah, that sounds bad. Now, as Jürgen noted, there is a vast world of people connected to this via the internet, since it's being live streamed. In order for those people to be able to hear the questions, it needs to be through the audio system. So if you have a question, could I please ask that you raise your hand? A microphone will be brought. Don't start speaking until you have the microphone, otherwise the question will be cut off. And all of the people in the electronic diaspora will be in mystery about what it is that you have asked. So let's move forward with that. Thank you.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, hi, Paul Warburton here from University College London. So I guess the word technology means many different things to many different people. You might expect a mechanical engineer to use the word very differently from a theoretical physicist. So perhaps you could explain in the context of the quantum technology flagship what you think the word technology means in this context.
What is your understanding?
I guess if you put me on the spot, I would say that implies that the technology, a new technology will do something that cannot be done by conventional means, and therefore you're able to sell it. So that could happen on a 5-year timescale or a 10-year timescale, and then we, again, it means different things to different people.
Well, I could go with that. I think we are all not really sure whether quantum technology at the end is such a good title for this flagship. Graphene or human brain is something which is in a certain sense more precise. So this question, can't we decide on some kind of overarching title in terms of defining a core project? Maybe Ian can also comment on that. It was something that we discussed. But at the end, we thought that due to the diversity also of the various areas, summarizing all this under quantum enhanced web or quantum web or something like that, at the end doesn't make too much sense. So we called it quantum technology, and as you said, trying to express that it's more than ERC grants, it's the ambition to really push a research field in the direction of relevance and impact in terms of, let me use the word, words creation in the very broad sense of the word. That can be technology, something, that you can really grab with your hands, but it can be also something different. But it should be more than just basic research in the sense of more of the same. There should be this next step taken towards devices and maybe at the end products, and there should be also an added value in terms of, getting more out of the whole initiative as from the separate parts.
I would certainly endorse what Jürgen has said, but Paul, I think your definition is a reasonable one in the sense that that's exactly what this technology will do. It will enable new capabilities that you couldn't do another way. And that approach has two things. As Jürgen has said, it can lead to wealth creation, but it's also going to lead to new science. Mm-hmm. We know that when you build a quantum machine of the scale that we would like to do through the UK and the European programs, it's going to open a realm of discovery that you simply couldn't access without those machines. So, the idea of coming together to do that, I think, reflects the scale and nature of the problem. It is, in building a quantum computer, it's not simply that you need to understand the structure of a trapped ion or a transmon. You also need to be able to engineer a superconducting circuit or a vacuum can. You need to be able to interface with a photonic network. So there are a huge range of different skills and expertise and know-how that you need to bring together. And that, I think, is the reason to do this under an overarching program. Now, the additional opportunity is that these technologies will not just provide discovery for new science, but discovery for new applications. And that is, I think, the aspiration that certainly the UK government has in funding the UK QTech program, and I think the Commission has in funding the Flagship as well. A good part of the public benefit will be the transformatory impact of this area on a wide variety of applications, and that will lead to benefits from across the piece, healthcare, right, telecoms, what have you.
Let me just add to that. I would agree with everything that my two colleagues have said. The new money in the UK certainly has been obtained because we have an exploitation route, that we could actually take the great science base we have and exploit it in terms of technology to produce things that people are going to need to use. Okay? Now, this is a precarious journey because it is new money for technology and it's exploiting the strong science base. So we have to maintain the funding of the strong science base to have something to exploit. So as part of our program, we wanted to make sure that as well as the new QTech, you invented that phrase, as well as the QT program that we have, underneath it all, through regular mechanisms, basic research still continues to flourish and be supported. It would be quite suicidal to say, oh, no, we're going to move all our emphasis into exploitation and have nothing to exploit. And this is a tightrope you walk because we understand this as scientists and engineers, but our paymasters may not. And we've got to make sure they understand that we have to have a strong science base in order for this to succeed as well. And we've worked really hard on that in the UK. And I know that this has been a dialogue in Europe as well, because the strength of quantum science in Europe is what's enabled quantum technology to flourish. Quantum science in Europe has been sponsored both by national agencies, but especially by the ERC. And it's really important that Brussels doesn't say, we have a flagship, therefore we don't need to fund the ERC. This would be suicide. We've worked really hard on the comparable exercise here in the UK, and I know people are worried and are dealing with it in Europe as well.
Hello. John Morton, UCL. Thanks for the very nice, clear talk. I've got a couple of questions. One is about the strategic research agenda and the diagram you showed with these vertical pillars, communication, computation, so on, and basic science. And I think their roles were very clear. And then you also showed these cross-cutting themes: engineering, control, theory, software, education. And I guess my question is how exactly those cross-cutting themes can be supported in a truly horizontal manner. In a sense, do you envisage educational programs that really cut across all those areas in a similar way to, for example, the doctoral training programs that we have at Imperial and at UCL, which are really generalist in quantum technologies? And I think that's a big strength. Mm-hmm. And similarly, in engineering, one of the things that excites me is looking at common engineering challenges for platforms that cut across these different pillars. And so to what extent those kinds of common engineering problems that may address, operate in a horizontal manner can be captured by this. Actually, so I'll just ask that question.
I mean, I don't know how you do this in your UK initiative. Maybe you can comment on that too. I think here the idea was to really implement as many of these horizontal topics within one of the vertical pillars. And not having something, as I said, with respect to quantum algorithm also as some kind of separate thing. This doesn't mean that maybe there will be some earmarked money with the Flagship Coordination Office to set up some kind of PhD program for the Flagship as a whole, in the sense of, graduate school activities or whatever. This also doesn't mean that maybe there will be some kind of infrastructure being set up that is only used by quantum communication, but that at the end can't be a user facility for all the participants of the Flagship as a whole. How this is financed at the end is something that one has to see. So there should be enough flexibility in the system as a whole to make all things happen, all schemes happen that seem useful to have a successful Flagship initiative as a whole. This also is true probably for standardized components in the field of electronics or low temperature devices or whatever. It doesn't make sense that this is developed 10 or 20 times all over Europe. It would be fine to have it at one place and then make sure that everybody can profit from it. And maybe there is one facility where this is developed and where everybody can go or take advantage of. So I think all this is possible, but it should be whenever possible, be more in the vertical pillars, but accessible to all the participants of the Flagship. And only if something in this matrix structure with respect to the horizontal bars, besides basic science, can only be financed separately, it should be financed separately. To also give you an idea about the size of the consortia, at least for the first 3 years, in the areas of quantum computation, simulation, and communication, you can have consortia with up to 10 million euros per consortium. In the field of sensing and metrology, we said, I think, 6 million.
6 million.
And in the field of basic science, 2 to 3 million. This already tells you, if you go through the numbers, how many consortia you will have, for example, in quantum computation. Let's just take quantum computation. Maybe you have 2 or 3, not more. You can also ask for more than 10 million. You can ask for less than 10 million. But 10 million is some kind of rough number where also the Commission and the Board of Funders thought this makes sense. So at the end, you really have to come up with something that is critical and tries to make a difference. Also in view of the competition at the global level that I tried to outline.
Hi, JT Jansen, MPL. In the strategic research agenda picture, you've drawn these vertical pillars as approximately the same size. Is that in reality what you have in mind, that these activities around comms, sensing, metrology are of equal size? Or do you shape it in terms of what's closest to market, or what needs the most activity?
Well, with respect to the flagship, I said there will be roughly 130 million for the first 3 years. And I just gave the numbers. 10 million per consortium, up to 10 million per consortium for computation, communication, simulation, up to 6 million for metrology and sensing, and up to 3 million for basic science consortia. So at the end, I mean, there will be only a limited number of consortia. So maybe in metrology and sensing, I don't know, there will be 4 or 5, something like that.
Okay, so
10 million for 3. 10 million for 3 years.
Yes.
Okay.
Winfried Hensing, University of Sussex. The first call has been published now. Would you be able to say a few things how that fits into the context of the flagship?
The first call of what, Winnie?
The first call, this
Of Quantera?
Call, not Quantera, like this call in coordination.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yes, so you're referring to the coordination action, is
That's
that right?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the frame setting, just like Qt Europe has been active in helping structure the community so that for example, what happened in Qt Europe was the virtual institutes drew together the community to frame what the state of the art and the future prospects were going to be for each of the theme areas. That work was important work for the flagship report because a lot of that was adopted into the technical roadmap that the flagship laid out. So I think the coordination action follows on from that and helps structure what the lay of the land is and what the immediate and future opportunities are as the new calls come on board. So if there is to be a small number of consortia, how do people self-organize into something that can make an effective bid into the next call?
Philip Ingleson, Oxford University and NKIT. Yeah, when you think about innovation, you think about obviously economic impact, but you also think about ethical and social implications. And in the FET programs in general, there's a requirement, the EU is very keen on responsible research and innovation, and there's a specifically a requirement in the FET programs so far for responsible research and innovation. So I don't see anything mentioned specifically about that in the flagship document, but in what ways will that be sort of taken on board in the quantum flagship?
Well, as a matter of fact, when we had recently a discussion on the intermediate report with the Board of Funders, this was brought up, this aspect, and we were somehow encouraged to take this on board. Mm-hmm.
At this point, I'd like to remind the YouTube users they can have an opportunity to raise their questions through the YouTube channel, so please use it.
Hi, I'm Kwako. I'm from Imperial. I'm a Mlynek student, basically. So I want to ask a question you touched on this previously a little bit, regarding the startup ventures in quantum algorithms. Can you elaborate a bit more on that, please? Thank you.
Startup ventures. Do you want to say something on that?
What I try to point out is that, or let me put it differently. I brought this example of Siemens, where people told me at the very beginning, we are no technology makers, we are technology takers. When this, let's say, quantum technology really moves on, there are different possibilities at the end to make an economic, impact. This can be done within companies like Airbus, Bosch, Siemens, Atos, Thales, whatever, in the big companies. But my feeling is that probably more dynamics will be created with entrepreneurial activities that start something, completely new that big companies would not easily support, at least not from the very beginning. Maybe they buy in later on. Therefore, it will be very important to create some kind of mindset, especially among, not only, but especially among the PhD students, the postdocs, and the next generation, to really use also this flagship to think entrepreneurial and maybe, start a company or do this in addition to the academic activity or whatever. So I meant this in that sense, because for me it's somehow obvious that at least at the very beginning new jobs were not created via companies like Siemens in the field of quantum technologies, in the sense that we are discussing this, but by smaller activities, maybe new activities, new companies that then, I'm not sure whether they can develop to some kind of Googles, but companies that should also grow.
And be bought by Google.
Maybe.
I would entirely endorse that. I think it also touches on the point that John raised before about engineering, and I think there's a real opportunity in there for companies to develop the kinds of engineering that are going to be utilized in these new technology areas. In fact, I think we can already see in the UK program that that's going to be the right way to do it, because what universities are good at in really pushing the edge of the science, coming up with the new ideas that allow the performance to be enhanced and that envelope to be pushed, requires a very different kind of creative structure than you need for doing some of the component and system engineering elements that you're going to absolutely need for these next generation technologies. So I think the algorithm side is a very interesting side of that also. I hope that as part of this we will end up with emulation capabilities that will allow new software to be tested, new applications to be scoped out, even as the next generation of machines is being built. So I see that startup entrepreneurial activity not just as a benefit of the program, but actually crucial to the delivery of what we want to get.
Hi, Alex Clark from Imperial College. You mentioned some specific encouragement towards young researchers in making them be involved in the quantum flagship. Is there going to be some specific calls for young researchers, or you expect them to just be involved in these various consortia? I was wondering if you could expand on that a bit.
We haven't been too specific on that topic so far, but I think all what you mentioned should be possible.
So something like fellowships of some kind, or more kind of...
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe also junior research groups. We also discussed, I mean, at the more advanced level, to have something maybe like a prize for some kind of big quantum challenge, in the sense of this longitude prize that you have had here in the UK. I don't know whether it still exists, but I thought that that's a great idea, you know, to have something something in the form of a prize for a new big idea that is a real challenge. So all these proposals, all these ideas are very welcome at this early stage, and whatever, I mean, the Commission and then the community makes out of our recommendations, they can be, but have not to be implemented. But I mean, everything is welcome.
Is it, Jürgen, perhaps you could explain the relationship of this report and the steering committee to what the Commission actually does. So this group advises the Commission on the setting up of the flagship, but my understanding is that the Commission will still run the competitive calls.
Yeah.
So it will have the final say over what instruments are involved in delivering the funding. Is that correct? Okay. So the Commission then has to decide which of the recommendations of the committee it wants to take, which existing instruments can help deliver that, and which new ones it wants to put in place.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is from the University of Warwick. So thank you very much for taking the time to tell us about this. I was wondering if this flagship program, which you say about a decade long, is it all finalized, or is there some mechanism for reviews in the middle based on how we do, or I mean, what is the formalism for that?
This will definitely be the case. There will be the ramp-up phase, and then maybe within the first 3 years, you have not only make sure that there is a quality control, but also some kind of, how can I say, funneling to somehow, you know, regroup, reoriented the various initial research activities to something that maybe within the following 7 years can have an even larger impact on the field as a whole. So there will be a review, especially within the first 3 years, but also in the following years. There will be a review process, not too heavy, because, you know, people should really work and not always be evaluated and write reports. On the other hand, we also said that we have to make sure that at every moment in time, new and fresh ideas can enter the flagship as a whole.
So just to sort of clarify, so the flagship and its €1 billion will be in place for the whole period, no matter what. It'll be morphed and modified, but it'll all be there.
As I said, for the first 3 years, there are €130 million somehow reserved, which is also feasible within the present framework program, and this is nearly 50 million a year. We have to see how this will then move on in the next framework program. Input is welcome also from your side. independent on how this will go on if the Brexit really becomes reality. On the other hand, of course, it will be important to have these national programs, and different countries will have different contributions. You have a very significant contribution here already. There will be more to come, as I've heard here in the UK. I can tell you that in Germany we will also have a national program of the order of 300 to 500 million euros over the 10 years. If you take the normal German contribution, and it's probably the same for the UK, it would be 20% of the 500 million to be matched. 500 million comes from the EU, and the other 500 million should come from the member states. So with Germany, 20% of their contribution in general, this would mean 100 million over 10 years. Germany is willing, however, to really set up a national program that is 3 to 5 times larger. The same is true at a reduced level in terms of absolute euros for Austria, but Austria, I think, will also invest something like 35 or 40 million over the 10 years, which is also much more than if you just take their normal percentage-wise contribution to the European Union. If I take the UK program, that's probably also, I don't know, 5 to 10 times more than
right.
You would normally have to contribute to
right.
to a European program.
So I think now it's down to me on this one. Yeah, right. If Brexit is, of course, a great disruptor of this, so we're working really hard to work out what would happen, and there are lots of options. It very much is unknown. One is, how do we contribute to stay within some of the European programs? That would be ideal. Yeah, how would we do it? How would we contribute? Failing that, are there other mechanisms by which we can continue to engage with our European colleagues? Because we've all been brought up in the quantum community to think of our European colleagues as our close allies. We've been working with each other for 30 years, and it's inconceivable that that's going to stop. So we've been looking at other ways to do this. Now, Jürgen mentioned earlier Quantera. So Quantera has actually been quite a useful instrument in getting things happen. I chair the Quantera Advisory Board. So we had 250 applications in the first round. We've asked for 90 to be developed into full proposals. There's a lot of great science out there. The UK committed a reasonably modest amount for that first call. It is our intention to continue with Quantera with a phase 2, because we think it's really important to stay in there. How we do it, we're still looking at the options, but it's really important that we try to do that, because I think Quantera is a really good enabler, especially of young people coming in with novel ideas that those of us with, say, geriatric tendencies might have forgotten about. Okay, so Quantera is one option. The other thing we're exploring is how much would we need to contribute to maintain international collaboration, maybe on bilateral collaborations. So if we took, let's take a rough and ready sum of what we might expect from half a billion over 10 years on a European programme. What would be the UK expectation were we to be fully in? Ooh, rough and ready, finger in the air, 6 to 7 million perhaps per annum. Yeah, maybe? Something of that kind? We're spending of the order, we're burning money of the order of 80 million per annum at the moment. If we could work out a way of producing a collaboration fund which will enable us to participate still in these things. It would be clumsy if it had to be done bilaterally, but that is an option that's being explored. Or we could do it pan-European. This seems to us, at least, and I chair the international working group on this for UK government, is that there's lots to be explored on this. It's very early days because we don't know the option, but I think it would be inconceivable for us not to do this. Now, when we look at this international collaboration, by the way, we're also looking at ways in which that same collaboration could be used with matching funds, so we can engage with our Canadian colleagues, our Australian colleagues, our Singaporean colleagues, our Japanese colleagues, and so on, because the race is on to realize the best out of quantum science. And it's not just in Europe. And when we talk about the quantum science part of it all, the pre-competitive stuff, we're looking at ways in which we can engage worldwide still. But in connection with the Flagship program, we're working really hard to make sure that the divorce, which would be a catastrophe for the engagement of British quantum science with European quantum science, which has been so strong for 30 years, will collapse. So I'm pushing this really, really hard. The UK Foreign Office has bought the message and understands it. We've got to just persuade our political masters. I'm not. Do we have any? Does anybody looked? Well, I was working with Number 10 on a program, and when PERDA happened with the election, because they said, could I come back on June the 9th? No one's answering the phone at the moment. We are, all right, look, to make it more compact, international engagement is important. European engagement has been so profitable. Many of us have been involved in networks, in cost actions, and all sorts of things for years. We're not going to walk away from it. And we're not talking about shed loads of money for that sort of engagement. And the fact that we might end up in a situation where young people can't go from one lab to the other, shared networking and so on, that's inconceivable. It's going to happen. But we're just going to have to do a lot of work on it. But remember, it's not huge amounts of bucks. So what Jürgen is talking about, the whole thing is contingent on strong national programs. And so our first task is to ensure that the UK remains with a strong national program. And that's our first task. The second task is not to have it channeled UK only.
Before we go to the next one here, I've got one question from remote place. Now, how will the funding be managed at the national level? Does the funding come via the national funding bodies or rather straight from the Commission? I think it is about the flagship money. Is it from national funding body or is it from the European Commission directly? That was the question.
The European Commission doesn't have any money, right? If you go to Brussels and look for a printing plant that prints euros, it doesn't exist. All of the resources in Europe come from national contributions. So, it's naive to think there's European and national contributions. There are only national contributions that go to the central pot.
Well, I also understand the question in the sense of there will be, if you take, let's say, this 1 billion euros for the 10 years, there will be the 500 million euros that come from Brussels, and they are distributed through the EC, through Brussels.
Right.
They should be matched by another 500 million at most via national programs. And the question, of course, is who decides on the national programs? Is this something done by each nation? Or is this money given to Brussels and then, distributed via Brussels? Right. I think it will be definitely distributed through the nations. And each nation will have, their own also priorities, and one of the challenges will be to somehow align the Brussels activity with the national activities in the sense of having something, complementary or whatever. But I can't imagine that, for example, Germany gives 500 million on top of the 100 million that we contribute anyhow to the 500 million that come from Brussels to Brussels. That won't work. And I think the same will be true for other countries and definitely for the UK.
I think that's right. Though the example that Peter just gave of the ERANET Plus, I think, is an illustration of a mechanism which can coordinate the European-wide and national programs in quite a helpful way.
Yeah, you've got to really avoid the situation where the national funding bodies play a role in cherry-picking their own personal preferences, because that's going to completely unbalance the coherence of the European initiative. So I don't envy you doing that one, because it's going to be hard at this scale. But I think it's absolutely essential, because otherwise you'll end up with country X saying, we're only prepared to put resource in if it involves, I'll make up something to insult somebody in the audience, NV diamond centers. Mm-hmm. That can't happen, because you have to have a balanced program.
Phil Marsden, Unitive Designer, London-based SME. If I can bring you back to the industrial part of this initiative for a second, I guess I've got a comment and a question. I think what we've seen in the UK initiative is that you can pretty much segment the industrial group in three categories. There's the suppliers who are very interested in making raw components for the technologies. Those people like Siemens or Bosch who might take that technology and package it into a device. And then there's a layer above that of industrialists who want to take that forward into application. And those are the people who are actually going to look to find out what the real market is, what the where these things are really going to be used, how it's going to go forward. And I think all of those three are really, really important for the program. So do you have a strategy for engaging the industrialists like that?
No strategy in the sense that something is more preferable from the various options that you just mentioned than others. I think that's really something that the companies together with the academic side have to discuss, and that might have a different emphasis from consortium to consortium, from topical area to topical area.
I guess there's a risk that the people who are going to be really engaged are those at the bottom of the food chain, those who just want to supply, who know that today they can sell something. And it's harder to engage those at the top who need to take it forwards. It's a lot of effort for them. From a micro SME perspective, it's a lot of investment. Mm-hmm. So I think those people, it's important to have those people on board, and I would maybe urge your group to look seriously at that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think the points you made are very well taken, and the UK programme, I think, has illustrated some of the points that Jürgen has noted. That is, each of the hubs has a different way of engaging a different mix of industry. The UK programme also has a means to co-fund on projects with companies. I think that's a helpful mechanism. Mm-hmm. And one hopes that in a subsequent phase 2 of the UK programme, the new structuring that we have for research and innovation funding will allow different streams to come together so that academic and industrial co-funding and co-engagement can really happen in a serious way.
Yeah, it's been one of the strengths of the UK programme that we're able to do both through the hubs, but quite separately through the Innovate UK programme, ways in which we can get that kind of engagement. And I note, I'm trying to find the email, that the German programme announced yesterday a programme by which, for example, Toptica and PTB are going to try to work out ways in getting compact clocks to higher TRL levels already. So even the German programme has found ways of doing this. The French have a similar aspiration. The way in which SMEs' investment can be de-risked for this early stage stuff is really critically important. And I think that's been one of the successes of the British programme. And I see that what's going on in Germany has a similar story.
Yeah, it wasn't a criticism. I think it's working really well in the UK.
Yeah.
We need to be aware.
Yeah.
By the way, so we are planning to conclude this event by 4. So Neil,
unless you have a burning question, Neil will give the last question.
Okay, I'm Neil Alford from Imperial College, and this is maybe a whimsical question, but I'd just like to ask the panel, some of the application areas that you've been looking at require cryogenics, and cryogenics was not great for high TC superconductivity, as we know. So what is the panel's view on the future of cryogenically enabled quantum?
Well, let me start with an aspect of this that I think has been very positive. Within NQIT, for example, we have a small effort on superconducting qubits as part of the overall networking strategy. We have significant engagement and investment from one of the world's leading manufacturer of cryogenic technology, who is, in the way that Philip noted, thinking about how that company will supply into the worldwide market for building computing platforms. If you look at the major investments on platforms around the world, the leading investments are in Google and in IBM, and those are both superconducting platforms. Now, I happen to believe that we have a better technology on offer, but I would, wouldn't I? So I think what that says to me at the moment is the verdict's still out on which platform's going to be ultimately the winner. But as in many of these things, my guess is there will probably be several different versions, each with slightly different capabilities, at least in the initial stages. So I think there's still a lot to play for there.
I think it's 4 o'clock, so we can conclude the event here. Let us thank the panel members, in particular Professor Jürgen Mlynek, for his giving us the information we wanted to have. Thank you.